Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV. And following our trip there earlier this year, we will be inviting various historians and people from Guernsey and Alderney to share their insight into the occupation and the war years. And first up, after my quick assessment of my visit when I got back, first up today is Amanda Johns. She is the tour guide who took me, Mag, and JD around Guernsey. The links to her touring company is in the description below. And as you know, the whole point of these Guernsey and Alderney videos is to let the world know about what those islands have to offer. And so there's links to the museums, there's links to the tourist board, there's links to Amanda's tour guide website, all in the description below. So you know the score, folks. That's where you find everything. But I'll bring her in now. Good evening, Amanda. How are you today?
Hi, Paul. I'm good, thank you. And yourself?
I'm good, thank you. So, yeah, we're just going to give these 10 facts about Guernsey. Every subject we're going to talk about today, we could do more on. They all go into massive, great rabbit holes of things to discuss there. But you've selected these kind of 10 opening facts to get us off and running. So I'll bring the PDF up. So your first fact, Amanda, is 10% of the concrete used Atlantic Wall was in the Channel Islands. And before I let you talk, me and JD, we knew that before going there. We were sitting on the ferry, for example, sitting from San Malo saying there's going to be a lot of concrete there. And as you know, because you were with us, the amount of concrete still just absolutely staggered us, So 10% is a huge amount. So I'll pull up the map there so you can see it. So explain the rationale, if there is one, as to why the Germans put so much concrete in the Channel Islands.
Well, ultimately, they saw capturing the Channel Islands as the jewel in the crown of the British Isles, and they never wanted to let it go. But it went to completely the other end of the spectrum. Off the scale, you see tiny, tiny Channel Islands on your map, and you see the whole of the Atlantic Wall. And it's just out of perspective, nearly 10%. Guernsey itself is only about 24, 25 square miles. And it's ultimately the capturing of the Channel Islands was supposed to be a stepping stone because they were going to conquer England. So actually, in the building process, nothing happened for the first 6 months. Then they realized they're not going to conquer England and they're never going to let the Channel Islands go. So they start the planning process. The crew that were here in Guernsey at the time started building work in mid-41. And then the organisation TUD workers were brought over in 42 and the real big construction started taking place.
I mean, it is absolutely insane what they did there. And we had a question, because this is all relative to the fact that the Channel Islands, me, Mag, and JD, we learned a lot from you and the people in Oldham and the people in Guernsey about remembrance and how you look back on it. And there's different opinions, or there have been different opinions over the decades with regards what happened during the war years. But a representative question came in from Jim. We'll get to this later on, but is archaeology on the islands frowned upon, welcomed, or neither? So I think that's a good time for you to mention the association you're part of.
So ultimately, if we talk straight after the war, people didn't want to be reminded about what had happened. So things are backfilled, bunkers are sealed up. Then only a matter of a few years later, then the British decide, oh, well, we need things that are inside those bunkers. So they pull things out, they destroy some of the tops of bunkers, trying to get steel and scrap metal. And then again, covered over, don't want to be reminded about any of this. People were also planting a South African plant called sour fig, and that would cover over the bunkers. So, you can drive along roads and you see these humps. You don't know what's underneath there, but we can pretty much know that there will be bunkers underneath there because ultimately the Germans documented everything. Nowadays, people are more interested, really interested in seeing inside these bunkers. And I volunteer with a group called Festung Guernsey. We're a very small group of volunteers, very dedicated and hardworking volunteers. And we probably only about 15 of us. We look after something like 20 different bunkers sites around the island. So more and more each year, more and more people want to come and see. They're supporting us in the work that we're doing, and yeah, and we have people approaching us saying, "Oh, we have a bunker in our property in our garden. Can you give us some more information? We're really interested, or can you help us dig it out?" Even we've had that as well.
So one of the things I think that JD and myself and Mag also found very interesting is that our understanding of the Atlantic Wall, primarily from where the sites we visited in Normandy, also a little bit up in the Pas de Calais, I think we've been to a few in the Netherlands as well, is that generally in France, the Germans built on empty land. There was nothing else there, and they moved in and they built stuff. Occasionally they would build stuff into some of the Vauban forts, but really they kind of started afresh for a lot of it. Guernsey is quite different in some regards, isn't it? Because you have these layers of different types of defenses. So it might be a good idea, Amanda, to just kind of remind the viewers briefly of kind of the periods of Guernsey's history in terms of defense and how they now layer up from the various eras. And while I'm doing that, the first bit of aerial footage I'm going to be putting in drone footage from kindly lent by JD of one of the Clarence Battery we went to on our first day there. So I'll have that playing while you're talking, Amanda. So yeah, explain a little bit about the different eras of history you can find there.
So ultimately, our history actually goes back to Neolithic times. We have menhirs, passage graves, dolmens that are even older than the pyramids in Egypt. So we're talking 2,500 to 4,000 BC. Over the many, many years, everyone has wanted a little bit of the Channel Islands. So if we start off with around about the 900s, we were invaded by the Normandy. So the Channel Islands became part of Normandy. We then fast forward 1066, Battle of Hastings, little old Guernsey beat England. Well, I like to say that. It's technically true. And we took over England with Normandy. We then fast forward again to the 1200s, and the King of France would like his Normandy back. So he recaptures Normandy. The British give us a better offer if we side with them. So we sided with them. So we have been part of the British Isles ever since, but there have been a few blips along the way. So in the 1300s, the French invaded us again, took over the island for a year, took over Castle Cornet that you can see in the footage there. Took 5 years to get them out of Castle Cornet. But then the main part of actually building fortifications really came in the Napoleonic era. So late 1700s, early 1800s. We have a number of batteries around the island that predate that, but the actual building of towers, loophole towers built late 1700s. We had 15 of them around the island. We now only have 12 because our government destroyed 2 and the Germans destroyed another 1. And then we have 3 Martello towers along the west coast. And sorry, let me just get rid of that. So we were not wishing to be invaded again. So we are heavily fortifying our island. And yeah, so we had a lot of towers built late 1700s, early 1800s. And actually, some of these towers get repurposed during World War II.
And that's, we're going to be getting into the Atlantic Wall in greater detail later on. And folks, this is, as I said earlier, we're going to be going into some deeper dives in some of this stuff in the future. So we're not leaving concrete behind. We're just temporarily moving on to something else. And I think on the next fact we're going to talk about is the evacuation. And this is where JD and myself, we were kind of trying to keep up with the fact that there's Jersey, Guernsey, Alderney, Sark, and it's not quite a consistent set of rules regarding what happened to each location when the Germans arrived and things like that. So take us through Guernsey and what happened 1940s. So that the Germans are expanding their empire into France. What was happening in Guernsey? Explain about the population, please.
So before the Germans arrive, we have a population of about 43,000. We can see the smoke going off from the bombs in France. We're only about 30 miles from France. So Winston Churchill decides to demilitarize us. So we had British soldiers on the island up until mid-June 1940. So all the British soldiers are taken off. The government then decide that they are going to start a voluntary evacuation of the children. And decisions needed to be made within hours. So one afternoon they decide, okay, we'll start evacuating the children if the parents want them to be evacuated. And that evening, the parents had to sign up their children. Exactly as I said, all children to be sent to the mainland tomorrow, registration tonight. And I'm local. I've lived here all my life. This is what my family were faced with, my grandparents faced with. So ultimately, I had two aunts who were at school, and my grandparents made the very difficult decision within hours that the two aunts who were school age would be evacuated with their schools. Now, because of their ages, they were at different schools, but they evacuated with their school, not together. So my grandparents sign up the children, and for them, they were evacuated within 48 hours. They didn't go on the first boats, but they were gone within 48 hours. And as it says, children to be sent to the mainland. But it says no more than that, because nobody knew where they were going to end up. All they knew is they were going to England. So you had situations where people had signed up their children, they were evacuating to England, and then the parents start packing up their houses and businesses when there is a bombing raid over St. Peter Port and the evacuations stop. So you had people who had decided that they would evacuate but didn't get out in time, and then are split from their children for 5 years.
Wow. And the reality is, of course, Amanda, is it's not that England in this period was particularly safe. I mean, this is the Dunkirk era. This is the Battle of France, the fall of France. There's the feeling that Hitler's going to invade any time. So it's safer possibly, but it's not exactly like going to the USA or Canada or something like that. So I can imagine that parents were really conflicted about this, and even just the perilous the journey itself, getting out on ships and what's going to happen on the way there. So I've seen on the internet and with the Guernsey Tourist Board, there's lots of information. They've interviewed people who were evacuated, and they say, you told us your aunt's story there. I'm assuming it was rather a mixed experience. Some of the kids loved it, some of them hated it, some of the parents were relieved their kids were safe, and some were more anxious. It's a complicated set of affairs, I guess.
It was, and who knows what the right decision was. You can look back on things afterwards and think, well, we shouldn't have done that, or we should have done this. But at the time, you were making decisions, split decisions within hours. And for some children, like you say, they absolutely loved it. And for some children, it wasn't quite such a good experience. My family, once they had settled in the UK, they did enjoy, inverted commas, their time in the UK, and it was a difficult decision whether they actually were going to come back to Guernsey after the war.
No, interesting point. So the next thing we're going to talk about is I've put evacuation timeline, but really it's evacuation, arrival of the Germans. Everything happens in a pretty condensed few weeks in the summer of 1940. So JD explains some of this history in his videos. And by the way, folks, there are links to JD's 4 Channel Islands films so far that he's put out there in the description below. So take us through that timeline of sort of April, May, June, July 1940, the sequence of events, please.
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, so middle of June, they start the evacuation of the children. So we start with, as I say, a population of about 43,000. On the 28th of June, 1940, bombers come over St. Peter Port Harbour, and they bomb that area. And That's the aftermath of the bombing raid. A very, very dark day for Guernsey, because 22 people were killed outright and many, many more died from their injuries. And then 2 days later, on the 30th of June, the Germans land at the airport and the occupation begins. So literally it is 2 weeks to evacuate. And approximately 19,000 people did evacuate. So not quite 50-50 of our population, but a significant amount of our population managed to evacuate in those very short 2 weeks.
And we were talking about the Atlantic Wall first, but I imagine that very few of the islanders, which regardless of which one they're on, Guernsey, Alderney, Jersey, had any idea of the number of Germans that would follow the first lot, and certainly how much construction would happen over the next few years, because like all invasions, they kind of start with a few people, and like most of the occupations that the Germans did, the Japanese did, some places they put thousands of people, some they put just a few, but that first arrival, I guess no one could have predicted that they would turn it, as you said earlier, into this fortress that it became, this ridiculous Hitler's folly. So the people, since you've been tour guiding and going there, that the memory of 1940, you were saying to us when we were there that for a long time people weren't wanting to talk about that period at all. People are wanting to talk about it more, especially kind of the next generations, those that it didn't happen to them directly, looking back at their parents' war, their grandparents' war. So tell us a little bit about what Guernsey is doing in terms of its libraries and resources for telling this story.
Yeah, so there's been obviously we're celebrating our 80th anniversary of liberation this year, and there's a lot of projects being undertaken. And one of the main projects is making sure we are interviewing as many people as possible, whether they were living in Guernsey at the time or whether they were evacuated. It's making sure that their stories are recorded for history. Also, a lot more education talks going on, education visits to different sites, and a lot more opening up of sites for people of various ages to come along and see. And Festum Guernsey, we are supported by, we have people on my tours as well. They can be as young as 5 or 6, and they can be up to the more mature ages of 80 to 90. And people are finding perhaps paperwork that they didn't know in their families existed and then wanting to research more. We have a fantastic Priaux Library, which is really good resource for people to go and have a look through. And then we also have the island archives as well. And they are so helpful for people trying to do research about this period of history.
Yeah, and worth mentioning Nick Lahoure's fantastic website. That is also in the links below, and his podcast about the Channel Islands. There's lots of great resources there. So again, everything is down there. So folks, we did say we're going to get back to some of the concrete again, and there's lots more concrete coming up. And now we're going to talk about the largest gun battery there. And you must get fed up in some ways, Amanda, with hearing everybody going, wow, oh my God, wow, oh crikey, as you take them around, that especially people like me and JD and Mag, who, if it's fair to say, we know our way around German concrete. It's our living, or has been for many years. And yet what you have there is just insane in terms of the size. So give us a rundown on what the gun battery is. We'll show a few photos, and then folks, I'm going to show my video footage in a couple of minutes. So tell us all about the battery, Amanda.
So every time you have a battery, you have 4 guns of the same size. Battery Mirus house the largest guns in the whole of the Channel Islands. The diameter of the barrel of these guns were 30.5 centimeters, 12 inches. They were, again, everything completely off the scale. Just to move these guns from the harbour all the way up to the site, they needed 4 half tracks plus a 48-wheel low loader trailer, which is going at walking speed so the crew can change the direction of the wheel so that they can turn around the corners, because our Guernsey roads aren't quite made for guns of this size. And the emplacements themselves to house the guns were the largest, and they were the only battery where the crew were actually living inside the gun emplacements. So each emplacement would have roughly 68 men and 3 officers. You have that 4 times over, plus all the ancillary buildings associated with a battery. So you probably had at least 300 men just on that one battery.
Yeah.
And here you see the design.
What was so
of the
remarkable,
battery,
when you showed us all the photos, and these photos are just some of the ones that are available on the Bundesarchive, is that, again, my frame of reference from Normandy is a lot of the stuff the Germans are building there, they're doing it in secret. They're trying to camouflage things into the dunes there. They're taking their own photos of this. This is their own propaganda thing. These photos are going to be going in their own, you know, signal magazine. They're making a big fuss about what size guns they're bringing. So we have these incredible resources. And you know, when you were driving us around, you talked about the fact that, you know, walls had to get taken down, and the houses that were in the wrong corners got in the way there. But I mean, just insane that they got these guns in location there. So incredible story.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
we just had the question from Scott where the guns actually came from.
So the guns originated on a Russian warship from World War One. The ship was actually scrapped in the late 1920s, and the guns were stored in North Africa. They are then sold to Finland in the late 1930s. They are on a ship called Nina on their way to Finland, when the ship stops off in Norway to be refueled, and the Germans capture the guns there. They then take them back to a factory in Essen in Germany and make some adjustments, because ultimately you have a gun on a warship that the warship is moving. You don't need the gun to be that maneuverable, but we're putting it in a fixed position when they brought them here to Guernsey. So they made the adjustments, brought them over by land to St. Malo, and then from St. Malo here on a boat over to Guernsey.
Well, I'm going to play the video now. So this is my footage I took there. So, you know, Amanda took us around there from whatever it was an hour and a half or something. So we can't possibly go into all the detail that Amanda can share about the different rooms, the different facilities there, all the paraphernalia and support equipment there. But while the video is playing, Amanda, just kind of give us a rundown, a running commentary of roughly what we're looking at. And if people want to see this site, get in touch with you, and you can facilitate the various open days you have there or private tours. So tell us what we're seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we are going through one of the 2 ammunition entrance and exits, and you can see those trolley tracks on the floor there. So ultimately the ammunition would come from an ammo store close by, brought on by lorry to the site, lifted onto a trolley, and then pushed inside the emplacement itself. So the room on the left-hand side there was for cordite. They had one large room for the shells and another room for cordite. So 2 rooms for cordite, 1 for the shells themselves. And you can see that we've painted the walls here. We take a view on the restoration. We don't like to remove original paint, but in that particular section the paint was really bad. It wasn't worth saving, so we did paint over it. But as you can see in some of these other rooms, we haven't started any restoration as yet. Still original tiles on the floor. We'd love to get some water and clean them off completely, but we have no water into the site at the moment, so it's on our very long to-do list.
People just asked about the rain. Just to interrupt myself for a second, I'm going to put the slides back up again with so there's a plan there of the battery, and you know it's not just the guns, as you said. It's the support network, it's machine gun nests, it's anti-aircraft guns all around it there, and the map on the right there gives the range of those guns. So as Amanda said, you know, Guernsey is not very far away from Normandy, and you can see that these guns cover almost the approach to Cherbourg. So massive range.
Yeah, I mean, the 51 kilometers was the maximum. It was putting quite a strain on the guns, so they actually brought the firing range back to anywhere between 32 and 42 kilometers. But you're talking about Mirus working in conjunction with so many other batteries on the island, on Jersey, on Alderney. So such a large area to be covered.
Yeah.
So we're walking along the crew corridor, and there were 4 crew rooms on the right-hand side. So 4 rooms to house 68 men to sleep. So we'll just say it's cozy.
Mm. And this is where JD and myself were surprised, and Mag, because it's so different. Well, the caliber is much greater than those at Pointe du Hoc and Merville Battery and Crisbeck, but it's the underground support network as well. Whereas mostly the guns in Normandy are just themselves. There's not much underneath them. Me and JD just got fed up with saying, "Wow, oh my God, wow, there's so much here."
Yeah, when you come to the site, well, first of all, the wow is the size of the gun bowl. You're just walking along a little pathway and you see the gun bowl. And then to actually come inside and see all of these different rooms, the size of the rooms, that is on the wall there, a unique emblem. You see the photograph there doesn't have the emblem. That's because it was taken in one of the other 3 gun emplacements. So this emblem is unique to our Festum Guernsey's emplacement. And then at the far end, you see the German eagle. So this is all original.
And there's you doing your stuff there. We have you live and we have you on video. So 2 Amandas for the price of 1.
Double.
And we had someone who used to play paintball. Jean was playing paintball back there in the 90s. I was at that one of that gun or one of the other 3. But yeah,
it's one of the other ones just along the road from this one. Yeah, they ironically do paintballing. They still do paintballing BB guns in the other battery. Sorry, the other emplacement, I should say, along the road.
Yeah.
So this is the machine room again. So you've had all the cabling underneath the wooden slats on the floor, and they are fed through what looks like a fireplace on the right-hand side there, eventually coming up in the middle of the gun bowl to power the firing of the gun.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And folks, remember, sorry, I was going to say, remember, for all your information about how to visit Guernsey, go to the Visit Guernsey website. There are ferries from various places, including St. Malo, and you can fly directly from London and other capitals. Like Dublin, I think you can fly from Dublin now, can't you?
You can fly from Dublin. You can also fly from Paris. Twice a week, flights from Paris. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can just tell by the graffiti, the markings, that the Germans were intending to be there for some time. This isn't a temporary. This is them setting up shop to stay there theoretically as part of the 1,000-year Reich. I mean, thank God it didn't last that long. But yeah, wow, incredible stuff.
So we're in the shell room now. You can see on the roof or on the ceiling there's the original monorail system. That was to move the shells around because of the weight of the shells. So the shells either weighed 250 kilos or 405 kilos. So you're not putting that on your back to move it around. They're the pulley and chain system. So here we are in the duty room. You see some original paintwork there. They're trying to make it more homely, if you can make a bunker of this size more homely. And original German wording on the wall there. We pretty much always leave the original German wording. We will not touch up any of the paintwork unless there is some very bad graffiti through it and it needs repainting. We will always leave original wording exactly as it is.
And we were remarking when we were there that just how much of the internal fittings are there, even though some of these positions, kids were playing in them, the public had access. In Normandy, again, I always reference Normandy, so much of the internal fixing, even the doors were taken away from scrap. So for us to be there, it was like a treat to see all the wiring and the cabling. And it wasn't just this position, it was other ones you took us to in Guernsey and Alderney as well. It was if you like looking at German concrete, then the Channel Islands kind of are the Nirvana. They are the Disneyland of concrete. Even though the construction of them was for a horrible event. I mean, the information is incredible. That what you can see is amazing. So that was a film there. We have a couple of questions, Amanda, about the guns. Then we'll move on to our next point. So the questions are, what happened to the guns after all? Scott is saying he assumed they were scrapped.
Exactly. Yeah. So first of all, there was a contract given to a UK firm. They start cutting up the guns, and then it was found out that that UK firm were literally selling to the highest bidder. So the contract stopped, and the guns lay half cut up for many, many years. I've had people come on my tours, local people, they bought photographs, and they say to me, I never knew where this photograph was taken, but having come on your tour, I know it was from here. Eventually, the contract was given to a local firm to finish cutting up the guns in the early 50s. But yeah, ultimately all sold for scrap metal. Yeah.
And then the next question we have, this is a good opportunity for you to sell the idea of visiting Guernsey. So Gary is asking, what are the future plans for maximizing the tourist appeal of these gun batteries and aka the D-Day beaches? Because that's kind of where you want to get. You want people to be coming, perhaps not quite in the numbers, but in more numbers you're getting to really see what there is to offer there. So your association is doing some of the work, the tourist board, but what is happening there?
So ultimately, yes, Fest on Guernsey, we are working on sites. We're taking over more sites. The more people that come, the more money we can generate to then put back in and then restore and maintain more and more sites. So ultimately, we welcome people to come and have a look at the sites, and hopefully it will just keep growing and growing and growing. Like I say, I'm not quite sure we want the Normandy levels of people coming, but ultimately, one, it's a beautiful island to come and see anyway, and two, we have so much concrete.
Yeah,
As you remember,
we
we
should
were driving
emphasize
along
the
the road.
fact. We should emphasize it's not just concrete there. I mean, Mag and I were blown away by the views and the cliffs and the beaches and the rocks and the wildlife and the bird life, everything there. So yeah, it's everything you could possibly want. So another question there from Andreas in Germany saying, did Rommel ever visit the Channel Islands?
Not that I'm aware of. But there were various people who were flying in to check on the building work of the fortifications. And actually, Mirus was named after a German officer who came to the Channel Islands to check on the building work. He was actually killed between Guernsey and Alderney. The original name for the battery was Nina, the name of the boat that was carrying the guns. It gets renamed to Mirus after this German officer who had grown up with another German officer who was stationed on the island, and he wants the battery to be named after him.
Brilliant. And then the final question about the gun battery, again from Scott, is were the gun crew Kriegsmarine or Wehrmacht?
It was a naval gun battery.
Right. There we are. So they were Kriegsmarine, but then the defense around it would also, when the machine it gets complicated, you then get army personnel as well. But yeah, fantastic for answering that one. So we're not done with concrete yet. On our next subject is about the hospital. So tell us about the underground hospital.
So the underground hospital here in Guernsey is the largest construction that took place in the whole of the Channel Islands. It is 75,000 square feet, which, if I try and put it in perspective of, if I do a tour of this site, even if I'm walking so fast, it will still take at least 3/4 of an hour. Usually it's an hour just to walk around the site. Guernsey is ultimately, Guernsey's rock is granite, a really hard density rock. And all of these tunnels that you see in the diagram on the screen now, everything was dug out of the rock. So you had Todd workers using pickaxes, using pneumatic drills, and using dynamite to blast all of this granite out the side of this hill to some extent, and then the tunnels were built, most of them concrete lined, but some of them brick lined. But it is vast. Originally, it was going to be used to house crew, but partway through the construction process, they changed their minds. So half of it is turned into an underground hospital, but half of it is turned into an ammunition store.
And I'm reminded when we're watching the video there, I'll just tell you a funny story, folks, because Mag is not the greatest, most comfortable in kind of underground places. She's not really big on going into caves, things like that. And she kind of was edging her way in further and further and further. And in the end, we were there for an hour, and Mag had lost complete sense of time in there. You know, she was following close to me and our guide. You weren't there with us, Amanda. And but then we realized we'd spent an hour there, just as you said, going up and down corridors. And JD and myself, we couldn't believe the film qualities there. I mean, every photo you took looked amazing because of the light and the water on the floors and the sense of it all there. So I'll let you explain a bit more of it. But it's another the ridiculous folly is that all this work, and it wasn't really ever used, not to its ambitions.
Not to the full extent, no. I mean, the hospital side could easily have housed 500 patients, at a push 800 patients, because ultimately the Germans thought that there would be land fighting here. They thought that there would be many, many more injuries. Yes, they needed a hospital, because in any day of life you need a hospital. You know, people get ill, people have accidents. You know, there were motor car accidents, there were accidents happened on the batteries themselves when they were doing drills. So yes, they did need a hospital, and this hospital was just for Germans, not for locals, not for Todd workers. At the end of the war, something like 8 tons of medical equipment was in the hospital side.
Yeah, amazing stuff. And JD's in the sidebar watching it, and I think we'll all agree that visit to there and the other places there, it will stay with us forever. And as I said, we knew there was lots of concrete, but we still were just staggered by it all. And as you said, it's not like they started in some existing chalk quarry or there was something there. They just basically looked at a mountain made of rock, and as you said there, just started picking at it with pickaxes and eventually dynamite to dig all this out in a very comparatively short space of time. I mean, just insane. I mean, amazing place to go. And tell us a little bit about what other uses the underground hospital has these days, because you Channel Irons are very inventive in your finding uses for dark underground places like this.
So as you can see from the footage, I mean, it's a great place to film, and we have had film crews down there. There was a film during the 1970s that starred Peter Sellers and Charles Aznavour. It's quite a dark film about some men who were during World War II stuck down tunnels for many, many years. So that has been filmed down there. More recently, we let amateur dramatic companies come down and do plays, both here and at Battery Mirus. So they've done things like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Carrie, they've done Frankenstein. We've also let children come down raising money for charity to cycle up and down the empty corridors. And more recently, we've had lights out events where you can come and walk around this site with no lights on at all.
Yeah, you're right. I'm good, thanks. I won't be doing that, I don't think. Yeah, no, amazing place. And we're having people, and thank you, Nick, for answering some of the questions as they're coming up there. But people are asking about the labor, and I know it varies from Guernsey, and we're going to be talking about Alderney later in this series. But who were the workers, and where did they come from? Who did this work?
So the main work was carried out by this organisation, Todd, which was a German engineering company. They had the technical expertise. Yeah, Nick, exactly the same. Not me in the dark, no. So the technical expertise, but they didn't have the labour. So they would bring over forced labour and slave labour to help with the construction. So forced labour is forced to come here or come to Guernsey, but they would have been paid and they would have been allowed to live in houses. But slave labour would have been, again, forced to come here, but not paid, made to work 13 and a half days out of 14, fed watered down cabbage soup, kept in camps, really appalling conditions. And these people were people that they've captured from all over Europe. I mean, there were Russians, Polish, Albanian, people from all over Europe made to come here and help with the massive construction that was taking place, mainly 1942 and 43.
Mm. And one of our takeaways, I think it was particularly talking to the historians and elderly man, was that it's a Channel Islanders story and it's a German story, but it's also all these other countries that had workers there as well. And there were British commandos landing in various places there. There were pilots from different nations who were downed around the island. So it's, if people are in doubt about whether or not they want to visit these locations, because there was no battle, there was no big battle for the beaches like we have in Normandy or the battle of the bridge in Arnhem. The liberation ended up happening kind of fairly benignly, but there's still a lot of stuff to talk about, even though there was not the site of a major battle. And people were asking about the resistance. We're going to be covering that later in terms of the underground activities going on. So yeah, it's an international story as well as being a Channel Islanders story. So there's definitely lots of reasons to go there. So we're going to move on to our next fact, and we just kind of mentioned it really is. Over to you, Amanda. The only parts the British Isles to be occupied, and you may want to clarify exactly the legal status of Guernsey, because on JD's first video, people started coming in. Yes, they're British. No, they're not British. They're kind of British, aren't they? So, without repetition, try and explain it all to the people who just have no idea in a few sentences.
Okay. So, as it says, Channel Islands, part of the British Isles. We are technically a Crown dependency. We do not have any vote in the UK Parliament. We have our own government. We set our own laws, taxes. We make our own decisions. But ultimately, a Crown dependency is dependent on the Crown in times of trouble. So in theory, should somebody attack us, the British should come and rescue us. Not quite how World War II panned out, but ultimately decisions were made. Like I say, there was no land fighting here. The Germans were living in houses that locals were living in. There was no particular area that could be heavily gunned that you wouldn't know if you were then attacking locals or attacking the occupying forces.
Yeah, and trying to explain the occupation in a matter of a few minutes would be impossible, Amanda. So we're not going to ask you to do that. We'll elaborate on that later on. But basically, everybody's experience was slightly different. As you explained earlier, some people have evacuated, their children have gone, or the whole family have gone. Some people were put to work by the Germans. Other people had less contact with the Germans. So, the experiences like those in France varied from individual to individual. But again, one of the things I was impressed with was the number of books that there are available about that period. Even the books by Bergerac himself. Jim Nettles did one on Jersey that we looked at. I know we didn't go to Jersey this time, but there's a lot of work trying to examine it. How do you, if an American tourist, for example, turns up and says, so what was the German occupation like, Amanda? What's your kind of go-to summing up of it?
Gosh, that is difficult. I would say that if you abided by the rules, you were okay, but we're not talking about food supplies.
Yeah.
You were okay with regards to, not being put in prison, being sent off the island, although ultimately there was a situation in 42 where some German soldiers had been captured in the Middle East, and the retaliation for people from Hitler was that anybody who was living in the Channel Islands that wasn't born in the Channel Islands would be taken off the islands. So again, you have another experience. If you were occupied and then somebody within your family wasn't actually born in Guernsey, they would then be taken.
Mm. I mean, one of the things we were discussing when we were with you and we were with the ladies on Alderney as well is that, as you said earlier, the amount of concrete the Germans poured on the Channel Islands with the number of guns they set up, then JD and Mag and I couldn't believe that, bays full of rocks where you couldn't even have a landing still were bristling with 105s and anti-aircraft guns, things like that, is that clearly it got to the point where there's no way the British government could have considered a large-scale landing there. I know they did, folks. They did look at it. They did consider it. There were these commando raids. But, I don't want to kind of put you on the spot, Amanda, but there must have been some bitterness, certainly at the time, as you said there, that the Brits were supposed to come to the aid and they didn't. What's the average feeling of the average Guernsey born person about that period and the relationship with the British? Did it affect long term the relationship with the Brits?
I think it very much depends on who you're speaking to and whether they lived through that period of history, whether their families were split. If your family was split and you think it was because the islands weren't defended when they should have been, then you're going to have a completely different thought process on this to somebody, say, of my age or younger, who didn't have that effect directly. So yes, but I mean, ultimately there were a lot of people that felt that the British had left us. And also when it came to 1944 and people are getting the news about what's happening D-Day, and that various parts of France are being recaptured, and Guernsey's thinking, or the Channel Islands are thinking, we're next. The war is nearly over, and yet they still had to wait nearly a year before we are liberated.
Well, I was recording a podcast with History with Jackson yesterday, Amanda. We were talking about what was happening, from June 1944 through to May 1945, and that Patton's Third Army is knocking on the door of Germany by September 1944, and then the Herkenforce, and there, you poor islanders are just watching this invasion force move on down the Cotentin, move across Brittany. You see the Channel ports, or the French ports being liberated, and Saint Malo and Brest and things, and nothing happens on your islands till May 1945. I mean, and of course, there's issues then post-June with, you were talking about it earlier, with rations and food, and things got a bit tricky in that last 11 months.
They got really difficult. All our supplies, whether it be food, fuel, everything was coming from mainland France. And then we're cut off. We cannot get any food or fuel in. People were literally starving. So we applied to the Red Cross to have some parcels brought over. Winston Churchill actually blocked the Red Cross ship from coming for 6 months because he said that the German soldiers would take the parcels. So it wasn't until December 44, just after Christmas, before the first ship actually arrived with parcels. The parcels came from Canada and New Zealand, and we are very, very grateful to those countries for literally saving thousands of people's lives.
And that was one of the things my favorite things we saw in the museum is those, as you said, those Red Cross parcels specifically from New Zealand, from Australia and Canada and places like that. And again, this international side of things. So which dovetails nicely to point number 7, which is this amazing museum. Now, we're rather spoiled for museums in Norman. There's like 35 of them behind the beaches, something like that. Guernsey and the Channel Islands has a few. The Underground Hospital counts as a museum, but you can't go there, folks, without visiting the incredible Occupation Museum. So I've got a 10-minute film I'm going to play now, and I'm going to let Amanda, who helps out there in all the many hats you wear, tour guide hat, digging out bunkers hat, working in the museum hat. So tell us about Richard and his museum.
So the German Occupation Museum, I consider, is the best museum on our island. I would say I take 99% of my guests there, and time allowing, I'm literally trying to drag them out. Everybody wants to spend more time there. There is so much to see inside. I kind of start with, look, if you want to read everything, I'm going to lock you in for a week, because there is so much to see. So this is one.
And people are going to hate this
life.
video because I whizzed through everything so quickly. But if you want to, folks, you can always freeze frame it and try and read it later on. But this is a whirlwind 10-minute tour of a museum.
So yeah, this is one man's life's work. This is owned by a gentleman called Richard Yome. He actually set up originally the Occupation Society in Guernsey. He still sits on the committee there, and his collection is just out of this world. People walk around, they go, where has he managed to find all these things? But he started collecting as a very young boy. He would find things in fields, and then as he grew up, he was at school, and his friends, they'd then go searching in bunkers, see what they could find. And the collection has just grown and grown and grown. And his museum, he's had to keep building extension to house everything there. He even has an original Enigma machine in the museum, which everybody wants to see.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of clearly a little collection that got crazily out of hand. I mean, it's but thankfully for us, it did get out of hand. And I mean, it's kind of a bit. It's not haphazard. It covers everything. It goes from weaponry to the occupation, to the experience of the Channel Islands in Germany, those that were taken away and deported. It covers the RAF, the bombing, the downed aircraft. I mean, it covers every aspect of it. It's an incredible museum, and we didn't spend enough time ourselves there. But hopefully, this is whetting your appetite for a future visit, folks.
Absolutely. We have here an interpretation of a kind of kitchen dining area. You have the father with his headphones on because he's listening to secret radio, probably his crystal set. The radios were confiscated in 1942, and the local people would start building their own crystal sets so they could listen to the BBC and find out exactly what was going on without being force-fed information ultimately from the Germans. Here we have a model of the Red Cross ship.
Yeah, you mentioned. Yeah.
So the Red Cross ship, the Vega, which arrived 5 times before the end of the war and once after the end of the war. And the cabinets behind have, as you mentioned before, bits and pieces that would have come from those parcels. So I mean, you go into the first couple of rooms and people are wowed by it all. And then you have to say to them, yeah, these are just the first couple of rooms. We still have lots more rooms to see.
Yeah. People are asking about, did the locals obviously have a certain amount of food and things like that? I mean, Normandy, famously massive, great amount of fields and orchards. The people of Normandy, unlike some of the people in the cities, didn't really go hungry in the German occupation. But Guernsey, it's not a very big place, so and there weren't that many resources, were there?
No, and although a lot of the local farmers stayed, they didn't want to leave their farms behind. They were told what to grow, even though they knew what was best to grow in the conditions, the soil, as you say, glass houses, greenhouses. But they were told, no, you will grow X or Y, and everything was rationed off. You had to, even the milk that was coming from the cows had to be given over. And then if the farmer was allowed to keep a little bit, but we're not talking significant amounts.
And we had the question earlier from Sir Capo about, were Germans ever violent towards people? Well, obviously there were people who were deported. There were people who were shot. So if you can run through a couple of things in the next couple of minutes, that would be great.
I mean, ultimately, the Germans wanted this to be a model occupation. and that they were supposedly treating the locals all very well. But there are numbers of stories for what happened to certain people. First of all, Mariozan, she was in the Salvation Army. When the Germans arrive, they say, there's only one army. That's our army. You're not wearing that uniform and you're not preaching outside. And she defied them, and eventually they arrested her. Sadly, she became ill when she was in prison. They let her go, but she died at the age of just 37. So very, very sad story. You also saw some pictures there of deportation.
Yep.
There were one of the underground newspapers. Their names were given over to the Germans, and they were taken off the island, put in internment camps in Europe. Sadly, 2 of them passed away and didn't make it back to the islands. So yes, if you went against their rules, there were implications of that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds trite to say, but it truly is an amazing museum, and it's nice that it is still Richard's domain, isn't it? I mean, you were saying how you and other people kind of advise him on certain things, but clearly while he's there, everything's going to be his way. He'll change things when he wants to. It's his layout, and you love to see that personal, absolute dedication to it. It's his museum, and that it's all the better for it.
Absolutely. I mean, he opened it in 1966. And as I say, the collection has grown, the museum has grown, and it just has a Guernsey charm about it. I will pre-warn people, if you come to the museum, you need to pay in cash. There's no credit card machines. It's a cash only establishment. But like I say, that's part of the charm. And we're just walking through the cafe here. He sells tea and coffee. Also,
Yeah, the museum director will serve you the tea himself, and he'll take your admission, and he'll answer your questions. It's incredible. It's a one stop, one man band.
Yeah, you cover all bases. You do the tickets, you do the cafe, and answer the phone and answer any questions from people coming in. So we're just
that's
coming
one of
to
my favorite bits there.
Yeah, the second part of the museum. So this is a mock-up of a 4.7 centimeter pack gun that would have been housed in a hotel that is literally just overlooking the harbour area. Probably never used, anti-tank gun. There were no landings at all, so it wasn't firing at any aircraft, it wasn't firing at shipping, so probably never used. Test fired, and that was probably it.
Well, the ridiculous thing about the Atlantic Wall is 95% of it was never used, wasn't it? The only bits that ever really saw any action were the bits in Normandy. Some of the guns at Pas de Calais fired across towards England, but yeah, I mean, it all was for nothing. So JD there, not behind his camera. That was a rare shot there, folks, of JD not actually filming anything. That he doesn't always have a camera glued to his hands. But yeah, amazing stuff. The defense of the harbor there.
So this is a maritime room. So there's a fishing boat there, and people will say to me, "Well, why were people starving? You're an island. You're surrounded by water. Just go out and fish." But the thing was, you needed a permit. If you took your boat out, you had to have a German soldier in your boat with you because they were worried you would escape. A large proportion of whatever you caught had to be handed over. And then obviously there were a lot of sea mines around the coastline, besides all the land mines that were actually on the land on the coastline itself, something like 60 to 70,000 landmines just on Guernsey.
Yeah, crazy. And clearly Richard likes his cars and motorbikes as well. So if you just like vehicles, there's enough there to keep you busy. Forget about the war, forget about the weaponry, just vehicles.
Yeah, the amount of guys I have that I'd have to try and pull them away from these motorbikes. They just, and start going in motorbike mode and tell me lots of things about motorbikes that I personally don't know a great deal about motorbikes, but I learn a lot very quickly from my guests.
No, don't we all? No, so just a couple of minutes more of this to go, then we're going to move on to point number 8. So, folks, again, to remind you, the link to the museum is in the description below. You can find out more about opening times and access. As I said, as Amanda said, cash only. And it's just one of many places. The other thing about Guernsey, it's all very compact, isn't it? I mean, it's not a very big place, so you can kind of do it in a car or cycle it. And some of the places you can kind of walk around and see a hell of a lot just on foot. So incredibly efficient, and you've got people like Amanda who can take you on a tour. So yeah, that's the museum pretty much covered. And folks, I'm planning to have Richard on at some point, probably with Amanda, to help him out and with the tech and things like that, and ask him some more questions about the museum. He's got some amazing stories about nearly getting locked in a bunker when he was a young man. He was investigating, and how he recovered some of the stuff, and what his understanding has been of the the 80 years since the war, of how moods have changed, how opinions have changed. So there we are. There's a quick, brief tour of the Guernsey Occupation Museum. So brilliant. So we had a quick question, which I think hopefully you can answer. Ian asked about how many people from Guernsey were serving in British forces, because it's another part of the story is that many Channel Islanders ended up going off and serving with the British. Do you happen to know the number who went from Guernsey?
I don't know the number. I know that obviously a lot of the Guernsey lads in the forces were used for the Commando raids, because they knew exactly which beaches to land on. They knew the rock formation. They had people here that they could ask information from. I don't know if Nick's on our podcast.
He's in there. Nick might know. If he doesn't know, he'll be busy googling it and finding out. But he probably knows it. So we're going to move on to fact number 8, which is back to the idea of just how much stuff there is and what there is to see. So we're talking about one of the particular fortifications. So over to you, Amanda. We've got drone footage from JD and my video inside. So over to you.
So Fort Hommet is one of the 3 Martello towers on the island, and that whole headland was heavily fortified by the Germans. So you can see the brownstone is the original Napoleonic fortification, and obviously anything that is concrete is an addition from World War II. So just on this headland, we have 4 10.5 centimetre casemate bunkers. We have got pack positions. We have 2 searchlight bunkers that could have housed 60 centimetre searchlights. We have, there would have been another searchlight there, 150 centimetre searchlight. We have an M19 mortar bunker. We have a personnel bunker, and also other Tobruk positions just on this one headland that you can walk around the whole headland in, well, from one side to the other in less than 15 minutes. It's just crazy to fortify that particular area. They were concerned that the Allies would land on the more or less sort of flat beaches in that area, and that's why they are having all these fortifications. So you've got 2 10.5 centimeters facing south and 2 facing north. One of the casemate bunkers has actually been fully restored by Richard, who owns the Occupation Museum, and he opens that 2 afternoons a week. And then Feston Guernsey, we're doing an awful lot of work on that headland. So we are just in the video now going into the M19. So this was a mortar position, an automatic mortar, would fire 5 centimetre mortars, could fire up to 120 rounds a minute. This is the model of the mortar. So it gives you an idea of what is around the corner, should we say, what you're about to see.
So it's funny, man, because by this point, we'd started to learn that you were only taking us to really, really good places, because we were looking out everywhere you drove us. We were parking more bunkers than you can shake a stick at, all of which, if we hadn't been with you, we'd have stopped our car and gone, let's have a look at that one. Let's have a look at that. And we would have, in the end, wasted our day on what we now realize were lesser bunkers. But for us, they seemed really cool. And then you would go, no, boys, wait, we're going to take you to some really cool stuff. And, you know, again, we were like kids in a sweet shop with this stuff. So back to you.
Yeah, so this mortar has been fully restored by the Festum Guernsey volunteers. Took over 8 years to fully restore it. I mean, it was a completely rusted, mangled piece of metal, to put one of better words. So there were a number of M19s on the island. So this is what we're looking at now. This is the kind of state that the mortar was in when the guys started restoring it. So they managed to recover pieces from other M19s around the island. They had to actually make some pieces from scratch because they couldn't find them. And then this is what they have made, as they say.
And the fact that
These
we couldn't believe they'd gone to trouble of casting up all these replica mortar bombs, and every rack was full of them. I mean, some museums, they would just have empty racks and there'd be one on display, or there'd be a picture. You've put them and painted them up, and it's full. I mean, amazing.
So as you say, these are replica. They are made out of resin. Probably nowadays you'd end up using a 3D printer. And so we are now looking up to the top section of the mortar itself. So you get to stand on the bottom level, and then you can look up through a hatch up into the top section of the gun. And we actually fired it for the first time last year. It was very exciting. We had to get a lot of permissions from the police and that, but it went very well. And we're hoping that we can, now that everything is in place, we can fire it again. Obviously not firing mortars. We don't want to be firing
just making a bang
anti-personnel
sound. Yeah.
It's pyrotechnic, but it would have been exactly as it would have been back in the 1940s.
Yeah, no, amazing stuff. And there's some of the outside stuff. And again, you and your volunteers and other dedicated people have opening more of these things up all the time. And the same in Alderney, we were going to bunkers that they'd only been opened up within the last few months. And again, folks, if you're just thinking it's all just bunkers, you can see the prettiness of the beaches, and that we had some fantastic food there, fantastic experience there, just looking at the countryside. So yeah, amazing stuff. And then we'll move on to our next thing in a minute. So folks, you seem to be loving all this. One of you asked how many people are now planning a trip to go to Guernsey. So I think the answer is going to be a lot of you. So that's great. That's fantastic. So and there is a diagram of the M19 automatic mortar there. And I mean, yeah, incredible bit of a kit there. And the fact you've got it in its location there, and you all know so much about it, it's amazing. So we haven't finished on about concrete, and this is just this is just Guernsey. So nearly 1,000 positions, if you include searchlight, anti-aircraft, gun positions, batteries, on an area of how many square miles? Remind us, Amanda.
24, 25 square miles.
Just crazy, and that's one of the schematics there. And you do have fairly comprehensive archives, because you said the Germans did document everything they built there. But it must, even someone like yourself, when you're uncovering a new site and you're digging it out, it still must blow you away, just the extent of it. Even someone who does know it, the quantity must still shock you.
Yeah, it's so exciting when we dig something out for the first time. So your footage just before was showing a water bunker that we literally have just dug out in the last few months. So we were down there, guys took Friday off work, we had a digger, and we're digging out, and they pace it out, they know exactly where to start digging. And to just a normal person, you're looking at this patch of ground that has lots of grass and bracken and that, and you're thinking, well, there can't be anything underneath there. And within minutes with the digger, we then start to see the first steps. And it's just so exciting because, none of us had been down there, or only a few had gone many, many years ago. And most of us had never seen down there. So we're like, yeah, digger, keep going. And then when the digger couldn't get all the way to the bottom, we start hand digging it out. And it's, fantastic.
And this is just a little taster video from JD, because we're probably going to do a deeper dive into this site later on. This is one of the places, I think you took us this before lunch. I can't remember. Was it before lunch or after lunch? I can't remember now. But folks, if you're still considering going, and we haven't convinced you yet, this 2-minute clip from JD will absolutely convince you. And what a beautiful bit of countryside. Then with these massive, great bits of German concrete. So, explain what we're looking at.
So we're looking at one of the rangefinder towers now. This, that particular one was called MP4, very straight and angled, unlike most towers that are circular. So this is all in an area called Battery Dolmen. We have a restored 22 centimetre gun that literally you can just walk in. This is open to the public at any time. And it's another voluntary group called Guernsey Armories dug that out in the late 1990s. But what you can see from the coastline, as you say, beautiful coastline. You can walk a cliff path. I tried to explain it more as a cliff hike, all the way along our south coast. And the cliffs just look amazing all the way along, fantastic views. And you just need to make sure you're feeling a bit energetic, because there are places that are 100 steps down and then 100 steps back up the other side. So.
Yeah, no, and all the good food we were having was making it a little bit harder to move. So Nick did answer the question. So it's 10,000 people from all the Channel Islands went, which is about, he's reminding us, 10% of the population. Jason, we did say this, but Jason, people are still, as we were, staggered by the fact the Germans went to such an extent. So Jason, a bit of an urban warfare expert over there, been on the channel. My apologies if it was already discussed, but why? Why was so many resources dedicated building these defenses? What was the German intent? Well, I mean, it was stupid, wasn't it? I mean, yes, you're saying it was the showroom. It was to kind of show like the ideals of what the 1,000-year Reich would eventually achieve. And it was used as a deterrent, but it's also that hubris. Hitler got obsessed by places like Stalingrad because it was named after Stalin, and Leningrad named after Lenin. And it was his owning a bit of the British Isles. It was a bit of a coup he had. And it was sort of to kind of not bait Churchill, but there was a bit of a war of psychology going on as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. But as we say, it's just completely off the radar, off the scale of
it's just
really
bonkers.
what was
It's just, it was
required
a
here.
bonkers use of money that ended up, just as we said, making the Allies decide not to go there, because it would have, and the other thing is that we were so surprised at is it was everything going there was the best the Germans were doing. It was the state of the art. It was the best built bunkers. It was the up-to-date weaponry, mostly, although there were some older weapons as well. Whereas, Normandy and other places are getting the leftovers. They're getting the old foreign stuff and the low caliber guns, and so much of the good stuff is going to Channel Islands as well, which was just amazing. But we are going to be doing more stuff about bunkers in future shows, as JD saying, they're bonkers for bunkers. But we have one more of these 10 points, and this again, it's all meant to be a taster to bring you back later on, folks. But the underground newspapers. Now, you touched on them earlier, Amanda, but there's two, and you're going to explain a little bit about them and your own particular involvement with one of them. So over to you.
Yeah. So mentioned before, there were two underground newspapers. One was called Guns, the Guernsey Underground News Service. Unfortunately, their names, as I mentioned before, were given over to the Germans. They were taken off the island, and sadly, two of them passed away whilst they were in Europe and didn't return back to Guernsey. There was another underground newspaper, the Guernsey Active Secret Press, and they carried on throughout the occupation, knowing what had happened to the other group, but they still felt it was so important that local people got to hear the news from the Allied side. So from the British side, ultimately from the BBC. Now, in the UK, they have this blue plaque system. If you've done something significant, you will have a blue plaque. If somebody nominates you, to have blue plaque in your memory. So in the UK, Shakespeare, the Beatles, that have, if one of them passed away on the side of their house, they'd have this blue plaque. And in Guernsey, we have a similar thing run by our own museum service. So this is me literally a couple of weeks ago. This is the 6th of May this year. So 2 years ago, I nominated GASP, Guernsey Active Secret Press, for a blue plaque. Guns had one, GASP didn't. And I was delighted that finally, after 2 years of putting the nomination in, a year finding out it had been approved, we actually got to unveil the plaque. And that is the bailiff, who is the head of our legal system here in Guernsey. He is unveiling the plaque for GASP on the side of the building where the newspapers were actually typed up. So it was a wonderful day. We had people who had family connections to agents who were living in the UK, who came over specially to watch this unveiling of the blue plaque. I got to do a speech, and it was a really, really nice time. My connection, my other half, his great uncle was the editor of the newspaper. So we're just glad that their story is now out there and will be more well known.
Yeah, and JD is adding information that important to note that these newspapers were printed onto MAH to backing paper, had a sort of local sort me out on that. So the fact they're using bits of paper and the way they're actually making them was really intriguing. And I think I'm speaking for JD here. When we went to Priaux Library and we were seeing the conventional Guernsey press and how it was being now still giving the news, but the news heavily edited by the Germans, heavily influenced by, no, you can't publish that, you can't publish that. And we were really freaked out. I did that in my analysis show, and I just got back of how, as a historian, I tend to think that accounts written by the war in English language are fairly close to truth. So I think of a German occupation newspaper in German being propaganda, but it kind of threw my brain a bit reading the conventional newspapers in English and my brain wanting to trust it because it seemed to be a good source. But the people at the library saying, well, no, because it was censored, and they were putting in what they were down. It was the bit about D-Day was amazing, how it was reported there. Germans holding off very well. The Allied landings are struggling to get ashore. German casualties have been light. Allied casualties have been heavy, and it freaked us out a bit. So the point I'm making is these underground newspapers would have been an absolute godsend to actually find out the reality of the war and what was happening from information from the BBC and other sources. So, yeah, amazing. Right, so we've got some, I think that's it for questions now, although people are just commenting about the fact it's Hitler's fortress mentality and evidence there. So that's our 10 facts there, Amanda, and hopefully we'll have you back with Richard from the museum at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. But any final things you would want to kind of get across about Guernsey and its importance in terms of World War II and why people should go and visit?
I think history cannot be rewritten. You have tangible objects, if you want to say, bunkers all around the island. It is a fantastic place to visit, whether you are a history buff, whether you want to, as you said before, there's wildlife, there's cliff walking. So if you're thinking, well, my husband would love all of this, but it's just not my kind of thing, then actually there's something for everybody. Yeah. And I have people who come over who say, oh, Amanda, we don't know much about Guernsey. You take us to some places. So I put a bit of a mixture in. And as soon as they go into places like the Underground Hospital or the Occupation Museum, they're just astounded. And all of a sudden, they are really interested in this period of history. They didn't realize they were till they start seeing all of the fortifications or the documentation and that in the museums.
And I want to just add something about the fact that it was very refreshing for us that everybody we met on Guernsey and Alderney were really passionate about this. And it's not that there aren't people like that in Normandy, but to some extent, the people of Normandy have got a bit complacent. Tourists come in such high numbers and people have moved in for commercial reasons and souvenir shops and some of the museums. You can tell it is just really a money-making venture, as are some of the cafes and restaurants, and people are a bit kind of blasé about it. It was really wonderful to meet people like yourself for whom it is still just an incredible pleasure. And hopefully tourism will get even more important to the people there, and more people come over and see this stuff, because yeah, as I said earlier, we knew there'd be a lot of good things to see, but we were just blown away by the quality of stuff and also the quality of the welcome. And as Mag said as well, and JD said, the quality of the food as well. The food, good beer.
Yeah.
The only downside was meeting Nick. You know, I'm joking, Nick. You're a great friend there. That was a fantastic lunch we had there and an evening with Nick. But yeah, so thanks, Amanda. We will look forward to inviting you back, hopefully with Richard at some point. But you are very busy, so your tour company is in the description below. But hopefully you'll get a few extra requests out of this. That'd be fantastic if that happens.
Well, thanks very much for inviting me on. Really enjoyed it, and always open to questions. Anybody can reach me at any time.
Brilliant. So, folks, we're back in tomorrow and Thursday and Friday. So, as always, click like and subscribe. Buy my guest books. Visit their website so that people know that you've come here from World War II TV. Reminder that JD's videos are in the description below. Nick's website and his podcast linked below, and all the museums and the underground hospital and everything is all in the description below. So, enjoy the rest of the day and go and check out some of these links. So, I'll see you all tomorrow. This is Paul Woodadge from World War II TV saying enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Bye.